Hello, my name is Pastor Ed Polrai. I'm the pastor of Generational Hope Christian Center. And today we want to take some time and share an introduction to biblical relationships and really the heart behind it. We've actually taken years putting all of this material together because we have seen the decline in our nation, in family, marriages, and the effects of it. In fact, I was reading an article about a month ago that Time Magazine put out November the 18th, 2010. And the title of the article was The State of Marriage in America. And what they wrote, they discovered that 70% of American adults were married in 1960, and now it's only about a half of all adults. They also noticed that 2/3 of 20-somethings were married in 1960, and now it's only 26%. So they ask this question: when an institution so central to human experience suddenly changes shape in the space of a generation or two, it's worth trying to figure out why. I think God's given us some answers, but here are some of the points that they discussed in this article. They found that nearly 40% of Americans think marriage is obsolete or becoming obsolete. We've redefined marriage in the last generation or two. They also found that 8 times as many children are born out of wedlock as compared to 1960. They discovered that there was a 13% increase in couples living together between 2009 and 2010. In fact, they were so shocked by that, they went back and looked at their statistics, and their conclusion was the recession caused this. We know, though, it's really a heart issue because marriage, there has been a war for marriage, and it really affects our sons and our daughters. In fact, in another article I read, I discovered that married adults now divorce 2.5 times more often than they did just 20 years ago, and 4 times as often as they did 50 years ago. They say between 40 and 60% of new marriages will eventually end in divorce. I'm here to share, and we as leaders are here to share, that we're willing to and we desire to fight for marriage and fight for our families. I have 5 children, and I am willing to lay down my life to see them succeed. That's really the scriptural principle. God says in Psalms that He dreams and He plans from generation to generation. The problem is we make foolish decisions when we look nearsighted at only ourselves. I don't want to make short-sighted decisions that's going to impact my sons and daughters and my grandsons and granddaughters. I want to see godly, biblical relationships restored. The truth that God designed marriage. He designed for us to have successful marriages and successful sons and daughters. We're willing to fight as a leadership team to expose the attack and the assault of the enemy that's fighting against marriage. We want to see in this next generation no divorce. Hello again. I want to take a few minutes and share with you the heart behind biblical relationships. In fact, there's a word used today. We call it biblical courtship. And there's been some resistance to that word. But I think as you listen to all of the teachings and you read through this manual, you'll begin to, hopefully it's our desire, that you hear the heart of biblical relationships, that the rules or boundaries not be elevated above that. But God designed us. He has our very best at mind, and that's what we want to communicate. As I said earlier in the introduction, based on the statistics alone, we see that the present system that we have in our culture does not work. Is that obvious to just me or all of us? Hopefully we're looking at it. In fact, if I was to get on an airplane, sit down, buckle up, and the stewardess gets on, and before taking off, she says, "Hey, I just want you to know that we're a pretty good airline, but we've had some difficulties here lately, and basically we've got a 50% average at getting from point A to point B. Just want you to be aware, 50% chance you're going to make it to your destination or not. I would unbuckle my seatbelt. I would bang on the door. I'd do whatever I could to get out of the airplane. And the reality is that's what we're doing with our relationships. When people go to the altar and say, I do, it's a 50-50 Russian roulette gambling game, knowing whether or not we're going to make it. That's not God's heart. That's not our heart. And so I want to take a few minutes and share with you the heart and why I believe we need to be deliberate in instilling biblical principles for the success of marriage and relationships for the next generation. The truth is, there's no neutral ground. Either we are deliberately imparting biblical principles in relationships, or the influence of our culture will and does. And they do not have the answers. In fact, how many of you, if you had a nice sports car in your garage, dads, and a young man comes to your house, you meet him for 5 minutes, and he says, hey, can I have the keys and borrow your car, your nice sports car? And by the way, I'll have it back by 11. How many of you dads would say, oh, great, I've met you for 5 minutes, don't really know you that well. Here's the keys to the car. Just be sure to have it back by 11 o'clock. None of us would. And yet we do that with our daughters. A young man comes to our house. We don't know anything about him, his character, anything. And we look and we say, just have her back by 11 o'clock. Well, I'm here to say my daughters are far more valuable than any sports car in the garage. And your daughters are far more valuable. And your sons are far more valuable than any sports car in the garage. Proverbs 4, verse 23, it says, above everything else, guard your heart, for out of it flow the issues of life. Biblical courtship is about guarding the heart. It's not about the rules. Don't elevate the rules above it. It's really about character, about godly principles, about learning to trust God. In fact, we've written down some of the biblical principles that we want to see elevated in the process. It's about hearing God's voice. It's about protecting one another. It's about purity. It's about honoring authority. It's about honest communication between a man and a woman. It's about learning selflessness. The Bible says, do nothing out of selfishness, but in humility consider others better than yourself. That's the attitude we've got to have in marriage. That's the attitude that's got to be learned and developed before marriage. And we want our relationships to be a witness that the world can look at and say, there is something different about them. So don't elevate the rules above the heart, but let the principles come alive. The boundaries and the rules are only there to help build character and reinforce godly principles. So it's our dream to see no divorce in the next generation. It's our dream to see happy marriages and happy families and successful sons and daughters living for the glory of God. Thank you for taking time to read this manual and implement it in your family's life.